You may be familiar with methylphenidate and amphetamine, two distinct classes of stimulant drugs. If you are experiencing difficulties with the symptoms of ADHD, however, are you aware of how these drugs function to treat ADHD? We'll go into great detail about the science underlying these two categories of stimulants in this video. We will examine their effects on neurotransmitters in the brain, their modes of action, and the pharmacological differences between them. Stay tuned for the finish, as we will also discuss the reasons these medications are considered regulated substances and can be abused. In order to comprehend the distinctions between methylphenidate and amphetamine, it is necessary to first go over some fundamental brain science. I need you to be familiar with neurons and neurotransmitters initially. Chemical messengers called neurotransmitters facilitate communication between neurons. A neurotransmitter is released by a neuron and crosses the synaptic cleft, a narrow gap between neurons. Next, the neurotransmitter binds to a particular receptor on the nearby neuron, causing that neuron to fire. Presynaptic neuron is the term used to describe the neuron that is delivering the messages, and postsynaptic neuron is the one that is receiving them. The fact that not all neurotransmitters bind to receptors is the next important thing I want you to understand. There are three more possibilities. It is possible for the neurotransmitters to diffuse out from the synaptic cleft and attach to receptors on nearby neurons or cells. The second hypothesis is that specific proteins known as enzymes break them down. I want you to focus on the third alternative, which is that the neurotransmitter will be taken up into the presynaptic neuron that released it in the first place. We refer to this process as reuptake. Precise communication between neurons is made possible by a sophisticated and highly calibrated system of neurotransmitter release and absorption. ADHD is just one of the many neuropsychiatric disorders that can result from dysfunction in this system. Let's now discuss neurotransmitters. The two neurotransmitters that are crucial for controlling motivation, mood, and attention are dopamine and norepinephrine. Therefore, it is believed that impairments in these neurotransmitter levels exist in the brains of those who have ADHD. The reward and pleasure areas of the brain are controlled by dopamine. It also plays a role in controlling mobility and motivation. Low dopamine levels can therefore cause problems with focus, attention, and motivation in people with ADHD. Conversely, the brain's fight-or-flight response is controlled by norepinephrine. It contributes to focus, attentiveness, and alertness. As a result, low norepinephrine levels may cause problems focusing and quickly being sidetracked. It's complicated and unclear how dopamine and norepinephrine function in ADHD. Nonetheless, it's thought that raising these neurotransmitter levels via medication can aid in the relief of some ADHD symptoms. This is where amphetamine and methylphenidate, two stimulants, are useful. Let's now examine methylphenidate's mechanism of action in more detail. Methylphenidate mainly influences the reuptake mechanism that was just covered. These images of dopamine and norepinephrine neurons will appear to you as tiny vehicles. The neurotransmitters are transported by these vehicles back into the original neuron that released them. The basic mechanism of action of methylphenidate is to target these vehicles, inhibit their function, and stop dopamine and norepinephrine from being reabsorbed into the cell. As a result, there is more dopamine and norepinephrine available in the synaptic cleft, which facilitates more effective neuronal communication. Let's now discuss the areas of the brain that methylphenidate most commonly affects. A part of the brain involved in motivation and reward is called the nucleus accumbens, and dopaminergic stimulation there can have a big impact. It may result in happy and satisfied feelings, which may encourage particular actions. Low dopamine levels in the nucleus accumbens can cause motivation deficits in ADHD patients, as well as challenges with executive functioning activities like organizing and planning. Methylphenidate functions by raising dopamine levels in the accumbens nucleus, which enhances motivation and lessens symptoms associated with ADHD. The prefrontal cortex is the second region of the brain to be aware of. It is in charge of executive tasks like working memory, attention, and decision-making. Methylphenidate elevates norepinephrine and dopamine levels in the prefrontal cortex. An increase in prefrontal brain activity has been linked to enhanced working memory, attention, and decision-making skills. Let's now examine the structure of methylphenidate. Dimethylphenidate and all-methylphenidate are the two isomers of methylphenidate, a molecule with the same chemical formula as another, but a different atom configuration, is called an isomer. This means that even if isomers have the same number and types of atoms, they can differ in terms of structure, reactivity, and biological activity. It's important to understand that each of these isomers has distinct effects on the body and brain. Some people think that the L isomer has very little clinical effect and may even be a contributing factor to some of the methylphenidate side effects, like increased restlessness and anxiety. It's important to note that scientists have produced drugs made entirely of methylphenidate's disomer. You might be familiar with Focalin or dexmethylphenidate. It is believed that this drug has a higher pharmacological potency than other methylphenidate compounds available. Because it is believed to be generally stronger than other methylphenidate-based stimulants, the dosage for this medicine is typically lower. Both long-acting and short-acting versions are available. Let's move on to stimulants containing amphetamines. In contrast to the methylphenidate ones, how do these function? While there are many similarities between the two treatments, I also want you to be aware of a few key differences. Because it comes in two forms, damphetamine and all-amphetamine. Amphetamine is similar to methylphenidate. For this reason, combined amphetamine salts are another term for amphetamine. The D and L isomers function on dopamine and norepinephrine transporters in brain regions that are comparable to those of methylphenidate. Researchers have successfully separated the D isomer and produced drugs made entirely of damphetamine. Examples of this include Zenzady, Procentra, and Dexedrine. The D isomer of amphetamine is more effective in binding dopamine than the mixed salt DL-amphetamine. Overall, DL-amphetamine has a stronger effect on dopamine than norepinephrine. When damphetamine and DL-amphetamine are contrasted, the combined effect on norepinephrine is greater than that of the D isomer alone. Even though these variations are small, they can be clinically discernible when evaluating a patient's reaction to treatment. This explains why some people respond better to some drugs than to others. I want to go into more detail about amphetamines and how they differ from methylphenidate-based products now that you have a better understanding of methylphenidate and amphetamine stimulants. More importantly, I'll explain why there is a higher potential for misuse with drugs based on amphetamines. As I previously stated, amphetamine functions differently from methylphenidate in that it prevents the reuptake of norepinephrine and dopamine. Thank you for watching our in-depth analysis of methylphenidate and amphetamine as ADHD medications. We hope you found this information valuable and informative.